Imagine a city, you know, once vibrant, full of life, law, order. Then suddenly the strong leaders vanish. The walls, maybe they start to crumble a bit. The streets, well, they empty of guidance. And slowly, subtly, chaos creeps in. Not with a bang, but almost a whisper. That's kind of the picture of Israel right after Joshua died. They had the promised land, sure, but structurally, no king, no central authority, nobody really uniting them.
Welcome to this Bible discussion. Today we're really zeroing in on the book of Judges, specifically chapters 1 and 2. It's a tough but necessary look at decline.
Yeah, it really is. Our goal today is to get a handle on just how quickly things went downhill after those huge victories under Moses and Joshua. We'll be looking at the compromises they made, how fast that generational forgetting set in, the idolatry that followed, and of course, that painful cycle. Sin, suffering, crying out, deliverance. Repeat. Right. And the big question for you, the listener, is why? Why did this amazing gift of freedom, without God's consistent rule at the center, just lead them right back into chaos? It wasn't the plan, but it happened. So let's dive into that first point, the sudden shift, that leadership vacuum we see right at the start of Judges 1.
It is pretty jarring, isn't it? You finish the book of Joshua and you've got this organized, disciplined force
Mm.
unified under
Mhm.
God's chosen leader. And then boom, Joshua dies. And that leadership structure, which was all based on covenant obedience, it just sort of disappears.
You see it immediately in the text. Like you said, it stops being Israel acting together. Suddenly the tribes are asking, okay, who goes first? Who fights the Canaanites for us? It's no we anymore.
Exactly. It's like the conductor walks off stage and
Yeah.
suddenly every musician thinks, okay, my solo now. And the chaos wasn't, immediate anarchy, no civil war breaking out overnight. The sources show it was slower, more like subtle cracks appearing. Think of like a city park. Used to be perfectly kept, right? Grass cut, lights working. Then the budget gets cut. Grass gets long, lights flicker, maybe some graffiti shows up. It's neglect, step by step, turning into chaos.
That's such a good way to put it, that gradual slide, because it really pushes back against this idea that, we won the war, so we're set. Past victories don't guarantee anything for the future, do they?
Not at all. That's the real danger here. Assuming the last generation's wins are just automatically inherited. This next generation, they physically had the land, but they quickly lost the spiritual discipline, the unity they needed to actually govern it according to God's ways. Without that central vision, that shared fear of God, it all just dissolved into, well, tribal self-interest.
And that self interest, that fragmentation, leads straight into the next big issue in Judges 1, this spiritual disease of compromise. They try to conquer, but they just stop halfway. Instead of driving people out like God commanded, they start living alongside them.
Yeah, and it's striking how fast that compromise becomes the default setting. They had the power, they had God's promise. But look at Jerusalem. Judah couldn't drive out the Jebusites,
Yeah.
other tribes. They just put the Canaanites to forced labor instead of removing them.
Okay, but let me push back a bit here. Wasn't that just practical? I mean, from a purely worldly perspective, having a subjugated workforce, maybe it seems smarter than total war or expulsion. Couldn't it just be a strategic choice?
See, it looks pragmatic on the surface, but it was spiritually deadly. The text implies they chose convenience, didn't they? Short term economic benefits from that labor, maybe easier military situations, rather than just obeying the covenant. The command to drive them out wasn't just about punishment, it was protective. God knew, absolutely knew, that letting those cultures stay would lead to mixing worship to syncretism.
Gotcha. So the partial obedience, keeping them around but under control, it was like leaving your windows open knowing thieves are casing the neighborhood just because, hey, maybe they'll mow the lawn cheap. You're inviting the danger right in.
Precisely. What looked like a small concession, maybe even a sensible policy to them, it just spread like a disease,
Oh,
spiritually speaking. They tried to have it both ways, follow Yahweh and dabble in the local customs, the idols. They figured partial devotion is good enough, right? But that's not how God works. He asks for wholehearted commitment. By letting those other cultures physically remain, they basically guaranteed their own kids would be corrupted.
which sets up Judges 2 perfectly, and it's just devastating to read. Then another generation grew up after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. That forgetting, that failure to pass on the story, that's the real turning point, isn't it?
It's the catastrophe. We focus on the land not being cleared, but maybe the bigger failure was not passing down the memory of God's faithfulness.
Mhm.
How do you forget the Exodus, the Red Sea, the Jordan crossing? Decades of miracles
Mhm.
gone in one generation. It happened because that previous generation was already compromised. They were maybe too busy trying to manage their coexistence with the Canaanites to really drill those foundational stories into their children.
It's honestly terrifying how quickly that knowledge just vanished. Like you said, spiritual amnesia. It's like a society suddenly deciding, history's not important, or parents stop telling the crucial family stories. The wisdom just doesn't get passed down.
And connecting that to how faith actually works. The source material shows that this generation grew up ignorant. They didn't know God's power, his faithfulness. So naturally, they drifted towards the idols they saw their neighbors worshiping, maybe even saw their own parents kind of tolerating or dabbling in. This isn't just personal failure, it's systemic. It destabilizes the whole community, the whole nation eventually.
Yeah, it moves beyond individual choices to generational collapse. Parents chose compromise, the kids inherited ignorance. And once that foundation crumbles, once that amnesia sets in, well, that's when you get trapped in that cycle, right? That predictable rhythm. Sin, then oppression, then crying out for help, and then finally, temporary relief through a judge.
That's the famous judges cycle, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pattern as old as time, really. Israel compromises often because they're surrounded by temptation. They chose not to remove God, allow suffering as a natural consequence of those choices.
Yeah.
And then eventually things get so bad they finally cry out.
But here's where you see God's character again, isn't it? His relentless mercy, even though they keep messing up.
Absolutely. It's amazing. In his mercy, which is often pretty immediate, actually, God raises up these judges, these deliverers. But they're imperfect tools, aren't they? They're temporary fixes, not permanent solutions. It's important to remember technically, a judge in this book is mainly a military leader. They solve the immediate crisis. They aren't kings setting up long term spiritual reform or administration.
So the cycle is kind of merciless in a way because the root problem, the spiritual vacuum, the compromise, it never really gets fixed by the judge. They just put a bandage on it.
That's a good way to put it. The judges alleviate the symptoms, but not the underlying disease. And these cycles, they show two things at once, constantly. Sin always leads to suffering, always. But God's mercy is also always there for those who turn back and cry out. But the structural issue, the heart issue, it remains. The text says it bluntly. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers. Each cycle actually got a bit worse. The spiral went downwards.
It's exhausting just reading it, this constant backslide. The moment the external pressure's off, they fall right back into the same traps. Which brings us, I think, to the core tension of the whole book, summing up Judges 1 and 2. Israel had freedom, geographic, political freedom in the land, but without God's rule, without that central guidance, it just collapsed into chaos and slavery again.
That's the profound irony, isn't it? They won the external battles, mostly, but lost the internal war. Without that clear vision anchored in God's covenant, the nation just fractured internally, like a company where everyone starts doing their own thing, ignoring the overall mission. The whole thing falls apart. Judges 1 and 2 show Israel trying to pick and choose. We'll obey this part, but ignore that part. They mixed partial obedience with rebellion because maybe that felt like real freedom to them.
But it wasn't freedom at all, was it? What looked like freedom, choosing their own gods, choosing which enemies to tolerate it, just led straight back to bondage.
Bondage to fear, bondage to doubt, and yeah, bondage to the very idols they started worshiping. They ended up oppressed by the exact enemies they refused to deal with initially. Geographically, the land was theirs. Total victory was possible. But spiritually, they were acting like they were still lost in the wilderness.
It's such a clear mirror for us, you know? It shows that without God's guidance as that central stabilizing force, our own pursuit of freedom can just become another kind of prison. It really does cut across time, that lesson. So, just to recap for everyone, the leadership vacuum led to neglect. That neglect opened the door for compromise, which caused generational amnesia. And that resulted in these repeating cycles of chaos, all because that wholehearted central devotion to God was missing.
And the story of Judges 1 and 2, it really is an invitation, isn't it, for you, the listener, to look at your own life, the spaces you're in. Where have maybe small compromises allowed chaos to creep in instead of God's order? Have we maybe forgotten some key stories of God's faithfulness in our own lives, leading to our own kind of spiritual amnesia?
Yeah, and maybe the most vital question, where can we consciously invite God back to the center, let him restore that rule, and bring his order into our lives, our communities today? That's the challenge this text leaves us wrestling with.
Definitely. And if this look at Israel's early struggles has been helpful, well, join us next time. We're going to shift gears a bit, back earlier in Genesis, actually, to explore how God works his plans out even through, human messes and schemes.
That's right. Next time, it's the deceiver and the blessing. We'll be getting into that really complex story of Jacob and Esau and how God's surprising purposes unfold right in the middle of their rivalry.
So make sure you subscribed, follow the show, maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss it.
We really appreciate you joining us on this journey of discovery. We'll see you next time.